This part of the park is off limits. You are not supposed to go beyond its borders.
Great, you have reached the end of the playtest.
Okay. Pro tip, if you tell me I'm not allowed to go somewhere, that's literally going to be the only place I focus on going, and I will find my way over there. I'm a rebel like that. I mean, look at this. This sign clearly says no photography, and I took a photo of it explicitly just to prove that I am indeed this generation's greatest maverick. Oh, this is The Valley Beyond, by the way. This was a game that the developers sent to me, and I think it had a really interesting premise. It caught my attention almost immediately. Looking at my email, they said that this was effectively an adventure game that contained no quest markers, no hand-holding, and was entirely driven by a player's own explorative desires. You know, you're the person pushing this game forward because you only see as much as you're interested in seeing, and you have to follow that curiosity. And I freaking love that core concept. Going and exploring interesting things is like one of my all-time favorite things to do in games. You know, that's why I like weird games like the Dream Emulator, and finding weird paths in like Minecraft worlds, and all sorts of other weird stuff. I love feeling like I'm exploring and I'm getting rewarded for finding something because I was willing to push the boundaries a little bit more and just see something no one else ever has. And to be fair, this game isn't out yet, so I absolutely am seeing something no one else ever has. This almost to me feels like I'm exploring some sort of lost civilization and bringing it directly to you, because no one's laid eyes on this yet. And for me, that's incredibly fulfilling and very, very cool. Now, before we get into this game, I do have some things I need to disclose. First and foremost, this game is pre-release, so everything I'm showing here potentially could be fixed, changed, removed, or whatever by the time it gets released, which I think is supposed to be November 20th. So, you know, beta is beta. Things could get substantially better or worse. I can't show anything I can't see myself, however. Thing number B I should probably disclose is this game does use AI in its production, so if that's something that bothers you, I totally get it. I just want to bring that out so that you know that's part of this game. Thing number C is that this game doesn't really have music. Well, it has some like small musical interludes when you get close to collectibles, but otherwise it's pretty much entirely silent and ambient. So any music I put in this is not going to be representative of the game. I don't know if they're going to add music at some point. It would make finding some collectibles harder, so I can't imagine they would. But if I don't have a backing track to this, it's going to be boring, so I'm just going to go grab some music from my folder of awesome background music I know of, but not representative of this game. And finally, as always, this is a PC game. I'm playing this on a Steam Deck with controller. This is not presently rated for a Steam Deck, and as of now, I would say it is at best a mixed bag. You can launch it, it does run, but it runs at more or less an average of about 17 frames a second, and the footage is going to be representative of that. They even have a frame counter in the corner. But yeah, it runs. It does not run great on a Steam Deck, just as a heads up. In terms of controller support, works totally fine though. Either way, let's get into this proper. Now, the story to The Valley Beyond is a little nebulous. You start out waking up as this low poly man who is told by an AI narrator to please move forward through the hall. But being the wild card I am, I decide to go check out my bed first, and it turns out that that's a teleporter, and the game's menus don't entirely work with the controller, at least in regards to displaying what you've selected, and I end up teleporting myself to the middle of nowhere. I then reset the game so I can actually do what it says because I have no idea where I am. It's not always easy being a loose cannon like me. Either way, we go through the hall, and then we see a shiny door that I want to go through because it's got a thing behind it, and we'll get back to that thing, but it's locked and I don't know how to open it. And I've finished this game thus far, and I still don't know how to open it, but I got what was inside, and we'll get back to that. Either way, we step outside and we see the titular Valley Beyond. Roll credits. A large, expansive, seemingly curated environment that seems to be controlled by some post-apocalyptic group of people. It might be like some kind of synthetic world. I'm not really sure. They don't really go too deep into what this world actually is. It has like these weird metallic spiky creatures rolling around, and there's supposed to be people in here you never find. But you do find logs that say something bad has happened, and you're just sort of left to your own devices. It's also worth knowing that these exposition logs aren't subtitled at all, and thinking about it, most of the subtitles in this game don't actually match the audio, which is a little concerning for accessibility. Now, even though my email says there are no quest markers, I think that's incorrect because occasionally I did see these giant towering red lights that led me to stuff. But your core goal is to find these masterwork art, large, important bits of art that are found in the environment, while wandering between smaller bits of art that are also sometimes puzzles and other times just collectibles. And that's the core focus of the game, is mostly just solving basic puzzles of various types and ultimately collecting things so that you can find your way out of this bizarre environment. But you are more or less left to your own devices to figure out how to do that, where to go, and how you get there. And I think that part right there, the whole you're on your own to explore this and figure out what you're doing and where you're going, that is the strongest strength of this game. It's definitely hitting that explorer's nerve in my brain that's just like, yep, want to see things, want to go find secret nooks and crannies, want to probably fall out of the world once or twice because this game isn't seemingly finished in some places. But I do appreciate its strong core bit. The key mechanic that this game focuses on, I think, in regards to how you get around the world, is kind of a little bit weirdly placed. Basically, your character has a Dead Space-esque health bar on their back. It is their energy meter, effectively. And you have to wander around from place to place, stopping at these green energy balls. Some are in trees, some are just on the ground. And these are seemingly haphazardly placed around. At the start, I actually died a few times before I even found one. And other times, I found no less than 3 sitting right next to each other later on. Like, they're just placed seemingly senselessly without any sort of sense of flow as to how you're supposed to traverse through the environment. Now, I think part of that is so that you don't necessarily use these as signposts to try and figure out exactly the way the world is intended to be navigated, because the core concept is, once again, being pushed around by your own sense of intrigue as to where you are and what you're doing, but at the same time, they effectively are still road signs telling you where to go, because you can't really stray too far away from them because your life is dependent on them. It's a little bit weird because if they're not supposed to be here to hold your hand and direct you where to go, why am I scrambling to find these in order to figure out where to go next? Because eventually my energy will drain and I'll die if I don't. I kind of wonder what the whole point of this energy mechanic is otherwise, you know? Because all it really does is force you to go from place to place, stopping briefly. And ironically, this energy system, all it really does is impede your ability to actually explore, because you have a finite amount of distance between point A to point B before you need to actually stop and recharge, or you die. And honestly, this mechanic does nothing to actually benefit the game itself. The puzzles themselves are a little bit all over the place as well. The very first puzzle I ran into, I solved with no idea what I was doing. Like, I was just told, hey, it's solved. I didn't do anything. I noticed that some of the pillars that were around me were moving slightly, but I had no sense of perspective as to what I was doing that was causing that movement. I didn't even really perceive a puzzle necessarily. The first major puzzle you need to go through to get the first masterwork is actually a pretty interesting little platforming course. The platforming in this game isn't spectacular, but it works well enough. Only that I then later just ran up the side of the mountain and could grab it without any consequence, because, again, I'm a renegade. Why follow the rules? But you can shortcut this entire challenge by just walking up the side of the hill. Yeah. One of the puzzles later on was, as far as I can tell, I think I was just supposed to, press B to select the puzzle as I was looking at it and that would solve it, but it didn't seem to work. And it wasn't until several hours later when I came back that it just arbitrarily decided it would. Like, the puzzle itself was highlighted, I had the little sound effect that was telling me, hey, you can select this thing to complete it, and it just didn't seem to happen, and I don't know why. Speaking of things that don't necessarily make a lot of sense and possibly aren't working all that properly, you remember that door all the way at the start of the video? The one that had something behind it that I really wanted? Well, I couldn't let that slide. And because I'm as much of a dissident as I was, I made sure to get what was inside, but probably not the way it was intended. I decided to try and sneak under the building and steal whatever was inside that room from below, and I did. I somehow managed to clip through the floor and grab what was inside. Still have absolutely no idea how to unlock the door, but I guess the thing I picked up was some kind of battery. In fact, I found a second one later on, and I found a thing that would have involved a third one that I couldn't seem to find in the game in any capacity. I took the battery that I found and wanted to bring it to a secondary building because it seemed important, and yet I could not for the life of me interact with the thing. Like, for some reason, having the battery on me and interacting with the thing you insert the battery into just didn't work until it arbitrarily decided to when I came back because I was so annoyed about this and tried to clip through the ceiling. Yeah, I don't know why, but just some things in this game just don't always work, even though they have the same sound indicator to indicate that they should work. They just sometimes don't. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of clarity as to what some of this stuff is supposed to be and what you're supposed to do with it, in a way that ultimately leads you kind of in a wild goose chase into other directions because what you're supposed to do with it and what you think you should don't necessarily line up. Sometimes leads to a disconnect in your brain about trying to solve these puzzles. Sometimes you might be doing the exact right thing and it just won't work, and sometimes you won't know what you're doing and it will work, and even just perceiving that there's a puzzle here is sometimes tricky. One of the later puzzles I saw, I ended up getting sort of the wrong information based on what I was told because it was a puzzle based on perspective. So I was like, okay, I see a little window based on the geometry of this statue. That must be the perspective thing I need to deal with. No, there's a puzzle that's right next to it that I genuinely don't know what the solution was. I just sort of started wandering around the individual pillars and solved it, but I couldn't even perceive that there was a puzzle here to solve other than the fact the game stopped me and said, hey, there's a thing here, and it just sort of eventually happened. Now, you can give this game a fair bit of leeway in that regard because, let's be honest, I am a very dumb person and puzzles are not my strong suit. I am awful at puzzles. But at the same time, I'm not necessarily sure I can say that these puzzles are unintuitive because I did end up solving basically all of them on my own. It's just some of them are a little bit more fiddly and unclear, and I think that is a core issue with this game. As much as I like the idea of having a free-form game where you can explore and you're sort of forced to figure out things on your own, this means that you have to kind of figure out that there are things to figure out, you know? How can you solve a puzzle if you're in a situation where you can't even really perceive a puzzle to be? I think that's one of the big issues about not necessarily hand-holding, but not properly guiding the player. You don't need to have giant signposts or anything, but allowing your world to flow a little bit better so that it's easier for your players to necessarily find things would be a lot more meaningful. There is very little natural connection between areas, really. At the start, once you leave the starting building, there's basically two puzzles right outside the door, and then there's nothing for a while, and you just have to sort of pick a location and go. And unless you're actively following the giant statue on the horizon to find the bigger, more important masterwork puzzles, there's not really a natural way to intuit where you need to go, short of that your energy is running low and you need to find more energy recovery. Again, I think that mechanic is honestly hurting the game, but it's the closest thing to anything guiding the player other than the occasional giant glowy beams of light that seem to just show up every now and then. The game in general is mechanically sort of at odds with itself because it's not really explaining anything to the player, and it's sort of forcing the player to do their own thing and follow their own path, which is fine, but at the same time they're asking specific things of the player without really being able to do that. I'm of two minds about this because I do like the freeform nature of this, but at the same time it feels like it's not as intuitive as it could be, and the world doesn't really organically flow from destination to destination in a way that's really sensible. You're just sort of wandering around until you find what you're looking for. But that said, this game had my attention for a very long time, which I think is especially impressive with the frame rate that it was having. You know, I was having fun, I was invested, I wanted to see what this stuff was, even if it wasn't the clearest, and even if the environment wasn't necessarily the most intuitive for exploration, so much as it just sort of felt a little bit of a mishmash. There's also 2 items you could find in the game that help for explorative purposes, but short of one collectible that utilizes both, the game never really uses them again. The wall climbing only works on specific walls, and it is very jank. And the glide is really only useful to get to that point and then never really used again. Both of these tools are underutilized and I feel like could be better used in the general flow of the environment. But at the same time, because the focus is go where you want and explore and let your curiosity take you where you need to go, they kinda can't, because these would be hard roadblocks for any player who hasn't equipped them yet. The core idea and the mechanics involved seem to be a little bit at odds with each other. It's sort of holding itself back mechanically. It's also worth noting that while a lot of the bigger, more impressive things you're collecting, the masterworks and bigger pieces of art, are followed by puzzles, and they are fairly varied in how they're handled, a lot of this stuff is just collectible, and there doesn't seem to necessarily be a rhyme or reason for any of them other than we wanted to fill this environment out a little bit more. And even then, the environment feels fairly empty. I do have a bigger concern with these collectibles though. As I said at the start of this video, there's not really any music in this game, short of a few little bits of music to sort of lead you to some of the collectibles. You know, you hear a little bit of a tune, you follow it, it gets a little bit louder, and then you find the thing. There is no alternative to this as far as I can tell, and I think that is greatly concerning as an accessibility feature for the hearing impaired. If your ability to hear is stifled, or if you're like me and you are severely sensory avoidant, you know, I play with my TV on mute a lot of the time, I will not be able to perceive these things short of me just stumbling butt first into them. Whereas if they maybe implemented a bit of a use of rumble to sort of tell you in a viscerally physical sense, that might be a much better alternative, or at least an alternative that would be a little bit more playable for the hearing impaired. That is something that does concern me greatly with this game. Ultimately, The Valley Beyond has a strong core idea, focusing on the mystique and the intrigue of having to explore a world and having that curiosity guide you. I like that a lot, but the world still needs to have a little bit more structure to it and a lot more polish to greater guide the player's curiosity. As it stands, it's just sort of big and empty, and while there are some really interesting stuff here, and I do value the time I spent trying to interact with it, sometimes it felt like it was at odds with itself and just trying to figure out what it was trying to do. The overall presentation to The Valley Beyond is decent enough. It's a little weird to play as a low poly character in a game that doesn't really match that aesthetic, although it does sort of highlight that your character is foreign to all this. It works in a way, but at the same time it just makes you stand out as just sort of being in an environment that wasn't necessarily made for you. The environment itself is fine. It's pretty much just nondescript nature stuff. There are some quite pretty areas that have a great use of color though. Near where you start, there's sort of an autumny area that is quite pretty. If I had one criticism aesthetically speaking, leading back to the core concept of the game being to intrigue players and get them to explore based on their own curiosity, there isn't really anything all that particularly fantastical in the world outside of just some of the larger puzzles being on the horizon. I feel like in this game where you're in some sort of post-apocalyptic robot wandering around, they could do more to make it a little bit more sci-fi, a little bit more fantastical, create a clash of the nature preserve with the destruction of the world. It just feels like it's not leaning into its core concept enough on a visual level. And there's an area in the game that's actually pretty spooky, although I think some of the visual effects in the areas that are trying to disorient you might have gone a little bit too far. Even where I knew where I was supposed to go, it was a little hard to figure out where I was supposed to go. And don't have a compass, you're relying a lot on visual indicators that sometimes just aren't there. That said, the game itself looks more or less fine. Audio-wise, like I said, there's not really any music to this game aside from some jingles when you get close to collectibles, and not having seemingly any alternative to that, I think it might be an accessibility issue for the hearing impaired. Otherwise, it's more or less ambient. There's not really much to talk about. Overall, the presentation is serviceable, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement here as well. Now, if you want a copy of The Valley Beyond, It will be available on Steam, as I understand, starting November 20th. This game will be $17 USD, which is probably going to be something like $23, $24 Canadian at launch. I think at that price, given the current state of the game that I played, which again is pre-release, I think one of the biggest things it absolutely needs is a lot more polish. That said, I do think the game does have a strong core idea of trying to get the player to follow their base curiosity and have that be their motivating factor. I just feel like this is really more the core of a good game, and as of now, it's not executed as it should be to achieve that, and even so, I think it would need a lot more built on it to really be something I could recommend. It was a fun game to explore, but I think that The Valley Beyond still needs a lot more work, and hopefully the developers are willing to put in that, because I think there is something here. It's just not there yet.
You need to recharge.